Hey everyone, Wags here from Eagle Dynamics, and welcome to episode 16 of our DCS F-18C Hornet academic series. In this video, we're going to take a look at a Case 3 Hornet recovery, in this case at night. Now, this video is going to be comms out because we're still waiting for the comms for the Case 3, but this will give you a pretty good overview of the actual flight that you're going to need to perform during a Case 3. So in this case, we have a carrier on a BRC of about 0.8 degrees, and that then places the final bearing of about 360, which equates to 180 degree radial from the carrier. Now for the Marshall stack, it actually is offset from the final bearing about 15 to 30 degrees, in this case over here. Now this is done to make sure the aircraft don't interfere with the aircraft in the final bearing. So in this case, we're going to have a stack at 10,000 feet and the range at 25 nautical miles from the carrier. And that's calculated by taking 10,000 feet or 10 and adding 15, so 25. So we'll start at 25 and we'll be in a holding pattern at 250 knots and we'll use 30 degree turns. And ideally we'll hit the 0.1 to penetrate towards the carrier at the top of the minute. But probably for this video, I'll probably be pretty off from that. So once I penetrate, we'll be penetrating at 30 degrees, which will be at a 210 degree radial from the carrier. And maintaining 250 knots, we'll descend at 4,000 feet per minute until we reach 5,000 feet. And at that stage, we'll start to level off a bit to 2,000 feet per minute. And then shortly before 15 nautical miles, about 14.5, we'll initiate a 30 degree turn towards the final bearing in an arcing turn, which will be at about a DME from the carrier of about 12 nautical miles. And we'll be sending down again about 250 knots at 2,000 feet per minute, down to 1,200 to 1,300 feet. And then about 3 miles before hitting the 180 degree radial, we'll start a 30 degree turn into the final bearing. And at this point, between 10 nautical miles and 8 nautical miles, we'll go ahead and dirty up, lower the gear, lower the flaps, and we'll keep penetrating and we'll go ahead and intercept the ICLS glide slope at about this point. And we'll go ahead and center up the needles on the velocity vector, and at 3/4 mile we'll see the ball, and then we'll go ahead and land. So this is a little overview of what we're going to be seeing in the video ahead, so let's get started. All right, so now that we're in the cockpit, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and set my barometric altitude to hold about 10,000 feet. And I'll go ahead and set up my displays. My FCS page on the right DDI. I'll go ahead and put my checklist on the MPCD. Because actually what I'm going to do is I'm going to put my HSI on the left DDI so it's easier to read. And I'll go ahead and set up my Zulu time. Place that on the HUD. So now I'm going to go ahead and set up some of my altitude indicators. So that way I'll get some indicators during my approach. So first I'll set the soft barometric altitude. And we'll set this to 9,500 to make sure I don't get too far below my 10,000 deck in the holding pattern. And I'll set my soft radar altitude to 5,000 feet to let me know when I need to start to level off my descent. And a little dark down here, so I'm going to go ahead and put some of the floodlights on. And on the rad alt, I'm going to go ahead and set that to 1,100 to make sure I don't get too far below my 1,200 foot as I approach my final bearing. And our next step now will be to turn on the TACAN. Set to 74 X-ray, turn it on, select the HSI, and enable it there. And now we'll select a course of 30 degrees towards the TACAN. And now let's go ahead and set up the ILS. We'll turn it on, channel 11, enter, and enable on the HSI. And next we'll let Mother know that we're coming, so we'll hit ATC, Stennis, inbound, and this way the deck will be all lit up when we come in. And so decrease the brightness on the HUD a bit, and we'll set the HUD altitude to radar. Now if you look on the HUD, you'll see that the range to the TACAN on the Stennis is 29 miles, and once we hit 25 we'll go ahead and we'll start our holding pattern. And as mentioned earlier, at a later point we'll be adding the realistic Case 3 communications, but for now this is going to be mostly comms out, but it'll give you a pretty clear idea of how you need to fly this approach. Okay, at 25 miles, I'm going to go ahead and do a 30-degree turn to the left to enter the pattern. And you'll notice on the left DDI I have the course arrow, and this is pretty handy to keep myself aligned in my Marshall stack pattern. And also on the HSI you'll notice that there's a distance from the course line, and this is also really useful now. And at 210 degrees, I'll roll out to be on the 210 degree radial, the reciprocal of the 30 degree. And I probably should have done it earlier, but I'll go ahead and set up my bingo level to 3,000 pounds now. And given that we're in the master night mode, I can go ahead and adjust the brightness on the IFE. And let's go ahead and lower the arrestor hook while I'm here in the pattern. And here at 30 nautical miles, I'll initiate a 30-degree turn and bring myself back onto a course of 30 degrees. And at this point, we'll go ahead and roll out on 30 degrees. And at 25 miles, I'll go ahead and start my descent. And ideally, I wanted to hit at the top of the minute, but I'm going to be pretty off. And different pilots in the real world use different techniques to make sure they're on time. And we'll probably delve into that quite a bit more in the next video on Case 3, where we start going on the comms. Okay, so 25 miles, so I'm going to go ahead and turn off the autopilot for baro mode. And I'm looking to maintain 250 knots at about 4,000 foot per minute descent. And also what I'm doing is I'm using the air brake now to try to help maintain that 250 knot airspeed. And I'm going to go ahead and disconnect the A-18C at this point. And even at idle throttle with such a descent rate, you're going to be having to use the air brake quite a bit on and off to keep you around that 250 knot speed. And at this point now, I'm just waiting for that 5,000 foot mark, where I'll transition from a 4,000 descent rate to a 2,000 foot descent rate. And at this point, I'll start to pitch up for a 2,000 foot descent rate. And with a lower descent rate now, I can go ahead and turn on the ATC again to help maintain that 250 knots. At this point, I'm looking for 50 miles to start my turn into the arc. And approaching 50 miles, I'll go ahead and do a 30-degree bank, holding 250 knots and trying to hold about 2,000 feet per minute. And I'll be looking to roll out at about 120 degrees. And I'll roll out here at 120 and continue my descent. And at this point too, I'll go ahead and set my course line now to 000 for my final approach bearing. And approaching the 180 radial, I'll do a 30-degree bank to the left to bring me on my course line of 000. And all the while I'm gradually descending to about 1,300 feet. And I'm also keeping a close eye on the course line on the HUD and also the left DDI. and I'll roll out on my final approach heading. And at this point now, I'm aligning the course line on the HUD to be right in the center of the velocity vector. Okay, so my course line is looking pretty good now. I'm at 1,300 feet and starting to decelerate. And now here at 10 miles, I'll go ahead and I'll drop the gear and drop the flaps to full. And now I'll go ahead and get on speed AOA. Okay, so established AOA now. And at this point now, I'm going to start taking the direction of the localizer on the ICLS to get lined up for landing. So at this point now, I'm going to start to align myself on the localizer beam, and that's the vertical line there on the HUD. So if the localizer is to the right, I'm going to fly to the right to have the velocity vector centered on that line. Or if it's to the left, I'd be flying to the left to have it centered. And what I'm doing now is I'm flying off to the left to intercept with the localizer. And once it's starting to move to the left, then I'll start moving to the left as well to keep it centered up. Okay, now you can see it starting to come left and centered in the velocity vector. And now I'm coming to the left as well to keep it centered up in the velocity vector. So at this point, I'm pretty well set on the localizer, and now the glide slope beam just appears well as the horizontal line on the HUD. And if the velocity vector is below, it means I'm below the glide slope, or if the velocity vector is above the line, it means I'm above glide slope. So as you might imagine, what I want to do here is I want to keep flying forward until the glide slope beam intercepts the velocity vector. Okay, 5 miles now, so I'm still on my localizer beam, and the glide slope beam should be coming down here pretty soon. So the glide slope beam is coming down now, and once it intersects the velocity vector, then I'll be using throttle to maintain my descent and have both the localizer and the glide slope beam centered in the velocity vector. And at this point, I basically, it's called flying the needles to make sure my glide slope and localizer are all centered up. And at least for me, and I know I probably shouldn't, I keep my glide slope probably just a hair too high. 2 miles and needles look good. And as with the case 1, I'm mostly just using throttle to adjust my descent rate. Three-quarter mile and watching the ball now. And I am down. So that's a little look at a case 3 recovery at night. Again, later on we'll take a look at all the comms once they're in, but I hope this will get you started on using the ICLS. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I will see you next time. Thanks.